My journey begins on a bus in East London. When I was growing up, Newham, Hackney and Tower Hamlets made up one of the largest blocks of urban deprivation in Western Europe. Some of us who were at school at the time raised some money, £360 to be exact, and we bought a double-decker bus. We took out the seats and sold them, and we bought some goalposts and some footballs and some art materials and some other games and toys. And we arranged a rota of bus drivers from Plaistow Bus Garage, because of course we were too young to drive this thing, and they would take it down to different sites at evenings and weekends. We would run children's and youth activities on and around the bus. It was fabulously popular. Sometimes we'd get 120, 140 kids at those sessions. And so began Community Links, the community action organisation, which I've been associated with ever since. Sometimes I would arrive very early for those sessions, or I would stay behind afterwards. And I would walk around the estates with the children, and we would talk about their lives. There were conversations which were to shape my life. I learnt about their overcrowded homes, often cold and damp, about broken heating, broken windows, about thin, hand-me-down clothes and embarrassment at school, about irregular meals, sometimes adequate, sometimes not, and about an entire existence lived on these few frugal streets. No outings, no trips, no treats. I learnt, of course, that poverty is about money, not enough of it. But it was also about something else. My friends and I were often the only adults outside of the family with whom those children had any conversations, had any real relationship. Sometimes even including the family. We were the only people with whom they had a real relationship, even though we were ourselves only a couple of years older than they were. And I saw how this relational poverty was linked to three effects. There was an absence of what we now call cultural capital. The knowledge we acquire from mixing with others, the knowledge about how to dress, how to behave, how to speak in certain situations. There was an absence of networks, the people we know who can be accessible role models, who can introduce us to work experience opportunities, to jobs perhaps, can tell us about college or the wider world. And no doubt in part as a consequence of those first two effects, there was an absence of belief. Not aspiration, that's a quite separate thing, but an absence of belief, an absence of confidence, an absence of self-esteem. I began to realize that two things, really. First, that relational poverty was at least as aggressive and as destructive as material deprivation. And second, that the two were inextricably entwined. Now, of course, it's possible to be isolated, but not poor, poor, but not isolated. But there is a particular probability that the two will coincide, and when they do, a trap is sprung. Relational want compounds material hardship. Material hardship compounds relational want. So my subsequent life as a community worker has been built around two missions, really. One around tackling the inequalities around those material essentials, and secondly, around building and sustaining relationships, the human essentials. Fast forward 40-odd years, how now as a society are we doing? Are we in a better place than we were 4 decades ago? Well, I'd like to say that we are, but I can't say that honestly. 1 in 4 people in Newham now, some 60,000, have debts they cannot manage. Now, I look around the world, and of course I recognize that all things are relative. But I also think about a mother I spoke to at Community Links a few weeks ago at the start of the new school term. Her 11-year-old son at a new secondary school had come home and said that he was being bullied, and indeed being threatened because of his, quotes, poor boy trainers. Now, none of us are separate from the society in which we live. And if you're a lone parent on a low income, perhaps also an irregular income, you want to do the very, very best you can for your child, what is the right thing to do in those circumstances? We in East London live in the shadow of Canary Wharf. The difference between their community and ours has got bigger. The gap between the top 10% of income earners in the UK and the bottom 10% of income earners has got about 10% bigger over the lifetime of community links. And of course, the extremes at both ends have become more and more extreme. The Trussell Trust, the UK's leading food bank charity, gave away some 42,000 food parcels 7 years ago. Last year, it was 1.2 million. So, sadly, I would say that material deprivation is alive and well in the UK. What about the relational poverty? Well, most of us network more than ever, but study after study suggests that meaningful time together is being systematically displaced by fast and shallow connections. We're becoming more atomized and automated. Simultaneously, our institutions have got bigger and bigger and more remote. And I suggest also that our attitudes have changed. Aggressive self-interest has become both a political and economic orthodoxy, and also a kind of new popular common sense. So it is that 1 in 5 of us are lonely. 1 in 10 are severely isolated with clinical implications. And might not these wicked numbers also account for many others? The number of hospital admissions for self-abuse, for instance, self-harming, have increased by some 68% over the last 10 years. And what troubles me about all this is not those absolute numbers, but it is the direction of the tides. We're drifting apart, and we are doing this for ourselves. And that's the really important part here. This isn't some kind of act of God. We have made these tides, and consequently, we can change them. I go back to my teenage self and my friends, buying a bus because we had an idea about doing things differently and because it was something we could do. We are the most educated, potentially capable generation that there has ever been. If we can't beat the causes of poverty and social exclusion, it won't be for want of capacity or capability. It will be for want of curiosity and want of ambition. So first, on material poverty, why have food banks become our response to the slashing of the welfare safety net? Why not a poor people's march on Parliament? Why such mute acceptance? Returning to a position where we don't have the levels of penury that necessitate the charity of food parcels isn't about right and left. It is surely about right and wrong. Our politicians need to know that we care about these things. And of course, there will be implications for our tax rates. We need to embrace them. They are the subscription that we pay for membership of a civilized society. And second, on relationships. This one isn't just about politicians. In fact, it isn't at all about politicians. My relationship with you is about you and me. There is stuff here that we and we alone can do. Start young. Pairing and buddying schemes work well in some schools from nursery to sixth form. Mentoring and mutual support should be built into school life and as much a universal part of growing up as school dinners and playground games. Maybe schools aren't your thing. Think of your workplace, the intern scheme, the Saturday job offer, the work experience program. Make it a promise that you won't draw from the usual staff gene pool next time. Look beyond it, add to it. And consider our communities. Maybe you're a shop owner or you work for the council. Certainly you vote for one. Invest in benches, markets, street art, jokes in the bus shelter, stuff that feeds social connection. And call for a common ground test The test applied in all our local planning regulation, requiring developers to design social connection into every new development, every new estate, not, as so often happens today, to design it out. Above all, look around. We can only tackle the causes of social isolation by fundamentally rethinking how Britain works. Our cities, our communities, everything, everywhere. Imagine a place where meaningful relationships run through everything we do. They are the central operating principle. Now think of your place, your city, your school, your business. What would need to change? Think big. Let's give this the thought, the depth, the reach that it needs. There are quick wins, but this is also a long-term mission. Make it a generational shift, imagining and planning for the land of our children, and fundamentally rethinking the way we live our lives. If there was one thing that I would like you to take away from my contribution this evening, it would be this. Make a plan. Nurture and embed meaningful relationships in everything you do. It might now be 40 years, a long time ago. But I still remember those children who would say that we were the best friends we had. Not because it was a ridiculous thing to say after so short an acquaintance, but because I thought that, sadly, it was probably true. And that is the nature of poverty, of inequality, of social exclusion. The nature of life for some people in the UK today. And we can all do better than that. So please, fight the tide, make your plan, find your bus.